working very hard on. And I think this one would be actually very useful for you. Um, I've been speaking with a lot of you, and one of the biggest things that's been brought to my attention is that a lot of you struggle with cravings. Um, Actually, before I even get into this, don't mind my background. I am actually in the process of doing renovations and things like that, so doing a little bit of painting behind me. That's why there's white on the wall and there's actually some painter's tape there. Anyway, um, it is what it is. But I really wanted to bring you this training here today because, yeah, like as I said, a lot of people have been struggling with cravings. Um, and the thing about cravings is that it can actually be quite difficult to solve because there are a lot of factors that can actually have an impact on your cravings. But ultimately, is that a problem? It's hard to say because ultimately, I guess what I kind of see coming down from the cravings is actually the problem of overeating and things like that. So, like, is it necessarily bad that we give into our cravings? Maybe not. I think it's totally possible that we can give into our cravings and not actually wreck all the process that all the progress that we've been making. So, um, I think we'll stay away today from actually diving deep into some of the complicated processes behind cravings and like why they happen and things like that because it's such an individual thing that can vary from person to person that's really hard to bring a training that's going to help everybody. Those are probably some of the things you'd have to dive into yourself to figure out what works best for you. But the purpose of today is to really bring some practical tools that we can actually use in the various situations that we find ourselves in terms of cravings. So I broke it down into kind of three main categories. You have your bored eating, which is not really a craving, but kind of a craving because it's almost like a compulsory um, eating kind of thing, but it's kind of like a craving. And two, you have stress eating, which is not necessarily directly a craving, but you can have a craving for certain things, especially when you are stressed. And then the third situation, you have a situation where you're always just hungry and you're craving something that's really going to satisfy you. So we're going to go through a couple of tools for each one of those scenarios. So if you are someone that consistently feels like they're always either fighting their emotions or always hungry or you're always just kind of giving in to some of the temptations and struggles that you have with food, this training will absolutely help you because we're going to give you 3 or 4 practical tools for each situation that might be able to help. And if you just struggle from something like bored eating, please keep reading into the stress eating situations and the I'm always hungry situations because there might be some tools in there that can actually bleed over into both or all three categories that might be helpful. One thing that I wanted to kind of highlight before we actually dive into this, though, is that one thing that's really not helpful is just saying stop eating, right? Um, of course, maybe we've had someone tell us like, hey, you just shouldn't eat that and things like that. Where it's just really not helpful. It's kind of similar to telling someone to calm down when they're angry. It's just it I understand the the idea behind it, but it's just absolutely not helpful. Um, so let's actually kind of think about implementing some practical tools instead of trying to get to the root cause of the problem or anything like that. Let's just implement some practical tools to help set some boundaries and improve the outcome when it comes to giving into our temptations and our craving. So one of the biggest things is bored eating, right? It's just like you're sitting around, you don't have much time, or sorry, you have too much time on your hands, and it's just like compulsory walking into the fridge, opening it, see what's there, going into the pantry, see what's there, open the cupboard, see what's there, in hopes of seeing something that will just be like, yeah, that's exactly the thing I want. That's a little behavior that you have to be careful of because it kind of, you know, it's almost just like you're waiting for just something that's going to tickle your fancy, and it might the chances that it's going to be something good, like a vegetable or a fruit, very very small. We're looking for something typically that's highly processed and not going to be good for us. So that's just something that you really want to watch out for. Again, something like this is like bored eating. We could absolutely take the approach of just saying, hey, well, if we're bored, let's just try not being bored. Do something productive with your time, and that's might be helpful. But ultimately, if we are going to give in, let's think about some of these processes. So first, what I want you to do is if you're going to give in to bored eating, put the food that you're going to have into a plate or a bowl or something. What you want to do is actually take a serving size and just put some boundaries around it, right? So, for example, like my biggest thing for me is like, if you give me a bag of chips, I'm going to open that bag of chips and I'm going to start eating out of it, right? And then before you know it, because I'm bored, I'm probably not paying attention, I'm just mindlessly eating. And then I look in the bag, I'm like, oh shit, I just ate like 75% of that bag. And then what further goes on in my head is that, well, it's almost done, so I might as well just finish it off, right? And then when I just wanted just like a couple of chips to have that for a snack, I end up eating the whole bag. And thus, what happens with bored eating is that kind of just spirals out of control. So stop that spiral immediately. Put that shit in a bowl, on a plate, something. Look at the serving size on the back. Be like, okay, it's 15 chips. Fucking count out 15 chips if you have to. Just set some sort of boundaries so that you can't mindlessly end up eating a full half whatever bag. Put it in a bowl so that way you have a defined amount that you cannot go past. And I'm not even going to say and go to the point where like you can't have a second bowl. Because if you finish that and go, fuck it, it's not enough, I want more, go have more. But at least you had the mindful decision of saying I want more and not just hand to mouth, eat the whole thing and go, oops, look what happened by accident. So that's just a good way of kind of creating some boundaries around that. Next would be like replacing your snacks with healthy snacks. So like sometimes it is kind of just like an oral fixation thing, and that maybe the thing we like is that we want something with a crunch or something salty, and you can absolutely achieve those things with a healthier version, right? So if you want a crunch, maybe having something like celery or carrots with dip on the side instead of looking for chips. If you want something salty, making like a salty protein snack kind of thing, that could also be helpful. What we don't want to do is just always, when we're bored eating, to go to unhealthy snacks, right? So try to do what you can to make it as whole as possible. Try to default to fruits and vegetables if you can. Vegetables are more voluminous, and because they're whole foods, they're going to make you feel fuller longer. Going to have better nutrients in that, of course. When you're talking about processed foods, you're more likely to get the trans fats and the high sugars as well, which is not so good, especially if we're snacking in the evening, which is dangerous. Well, not really dangerous. You're not going to put your life at risk, but you know what I mean. So that's the helpful tool number 2. Number 3 is, before you give in to your craving of bored eating, replace it with a positive habit first. So just say to yourself, okay, if you find yourself, you're bored eating, you have time on your hands because we're bored, right? We're not busy with anything. Maybe we're like bored laundry folding or something. That might be a little bit of a different situation. But do a positive habit first before you actually dive in. So go for a 10-minute walk, 5-minute walk, just like get outside and walk around the block. And just start replacing that. When you're bored, do something positive before you resort to food, basically. Now that shouldn't kind of create a cycle of like, do something positive, reward yourself with food, but it should kind of set up a situation where we're resorting to positive behaviors first and not just go, I have nothing to do, so I might as well just mindlessly eat for the next hour while I watch Netflix, for example. Not to say that you can't do that. Of course, this is all up to personal discretion, but let's try to do the positive behaviors first. And I know I'm going to say it right now, all of you absolutely can fit in 10 minutes of mobility right now instead of bored eating. So go fucking do your mobility. Number 4, reduce distractions, okay? That is one big thing, especially while eating, is that if you are going to eat, you're probably going to be scrolling your phone. You're probably going to be on Netflix. You're probably going to be watching something, doing something completely distracted. Just think back to the chip example. It's really common to open a bag of chips and just before you know it, it's gone. And then what? Pay attention to what you're doing. And I would have no problem with anyone snacking if they're in the moment, paying attention to what they're eating and not mindlessly distracted by something like Netflix, TikTok, Facebook, whatever. So put away the device. Don't eat in front of the TV kind of thing. Snack in the kitchen. while you're talking to somebody or while you're just, being there by yourself, maybe even like listening to a podcast or some music or something. But ultimately, don't be distracted. Okay, next is stress eating. Okay, so this is probably a big one for you guys. Stress eating is going to be like a little different. So we're probably going to take a little bit of a different approach, more of like a mindset approach to stress eating, but it should still be helpful for the stress situation. Okay, so first one is you want to treat yourself like a friend, right? So the first thing that I think of is like when we do get into stress eating, post stress eating, once it's happened, because sometimes these things happen quickly. It's almost like a traumatic event. It's just like we wake up out of this stupor and we're just like, oh, the ice cream's in our hands, the damage is done. What are we gonna do? Ultimately, like if you think about a friend that did that, what would you say to them, right? Would you call them fat? No. You're gonna call them an idiot? No. You're not gonna make fun of them. You're not gonna like, okay, maybe if you're like really, really close to a friend and you're very, very close, you might say like, why the fuck would you do that? Dumbass, whatever. But in a way that's probably said with love, right? And I'm not going to criticize any of you guys' personal relationships, but ultimately, for like a fairly close friend, you probably wouldn't shit talk them for doing something that they are maybe a little bit guilty or shamed about. So why would you say that to yourself then? Don't say those negative things to yourself. Give yourself a little bit of wiggle room when it comes to what I would like quote unquote call failure, because ultimately I don't really see it as a failure, but in your mind it might be like, oh, I fucking did it again. You know what I mean? Give yourself a little bit of grace with that. We are human. We're gonna have lapses in judgment and things where we just, maybe we had full intention on being a little bit more mindful with our eating or cutting out snacks, but then it's like mid snack you realize like, oh yeah, I was supposed to do that and I didn't do that. It's totally fine. We do our best and it's not always gonna be perfect. So give yourself a little bit of grace. Treat yourself like a friend that you want to help, and don't be mean to yourself. Second is obviously taken from the first part too. Replace your boredom with a positive habit first. Okay, so this one's really good for stress eating because we're retraining our mind to think positively first, to default to something positive before we result to the pleasure of food. We're not depending on that serotonin that we're going to get from the mouth pleasure of food. Let's do a positive thing first. So something like mobility is absolutely great here because with mobility, we're often doing things like breath work, kinda. Maybe not totally, because sometimes I do like watch YouTube and stuff like that while I do mobility or even Netflix. But again, we're going to be maybe a little bit more mindful, a little bit closer to like looking internally and being with our body. I don't want to say like being one with our body, whatever, but we're going to be a little bit introspective while doing mobility. And it's considered a positive habit and it's something that we don't do enough of. So something like mobility, do like, 10, 15 minutes of mobility before you start to stress eat, right? So really try to intervene with that and just plug that right in before we start resorting to food, because typically when we do resort to food for stress, it's usually not good, right? Another thing would be like go out for a walk because we're kind of relaxing, getting out in nature, unplugging. Really good habit to get into. Third is eat mindfully, right? I mentioned distractions earlier in the first one. This is big when it comes to stress eating because we can kind of get in this loop of stress eating and then it just kind of becomes mindful, maybe kind of like blends into like bored eating or like maybe like a sort of a fallacy of sunken costs where we're like, hey, we've already ingested 800 calories of ice cream. What's another 500? Because fuck it, we've already gone this far. Might as well enjoy it. You know what I mean? Which can kind of be destructive behavior. So I want us to kind of disassociate from that a little bit and be a little bit more mindful while we're eating. So like what does eating mindfully look like? First of all, we're not dealing with distractions, right? So no TV, no phone, no TikTok, any of that stuff. It's just us and our food with the exception of somebody else. So we can be with, the family, we can be with a loved one, we can be out on a date, we can be with friends, and you can still eat mindfully because in a social situation doesn't really count because typically we're slowing down, things like that. Another thing, the second part of eating mindfully is we have to slow down, okay? So we're talking about putting the fork down between bites, chewing your food fully, not eating like you haven't eaten in fucking 20 days. Slow down, be patient with your food, put your fork down, take a breath between each bite, have a drink, whatever it is, if you've ever been in a situation where you're like struggling to breathe during your meal, that is a sign that you probably need to slow down and eat mindfully. The third process or kind of area of eating mindfully would be like kind of thinking introspectively a little bit. It's not like too hooey, but it's a little bit like, let's get used to the feeling of actually eating. Because a lot of time when we eat mindlessly, there's no physical process to it. We just kind of, we put our hand in the bag, food goes to mouth, we chew, and fucking whatever happens, happens. You know what I mean? So think about the feeling of the food going down, once we swallow, going down through our esophagus, down into our stomachs. You should be able to feel that. Like if you think about the sensation when you're really warm and you drink a nice cold glass of water, you're going to feel all that, and you're going to feel it coat your stomach, right? That's the kind of level of feeling that we're talking about. You also might want to go and start thinking about yourself, like ask yourselves personal questions like, how are you feeling right now, right? Are you eating because you're hungry? Are you eating because you feel emotional? Is what you're eating right now supporting your goals? Is this putting you further away from your goals? All these things are valid questions to ask yourself, just to check in with yourself to see why you're eating, right? Because sometimes it can become so automatic that we actually don't even know that we're doing it. And if you can find a way to stop and ask yourself, like, how are you feeling? Are you stressed? Are you eating because you're sad? Are you eating because you're mad? Are you sure? Is it like just checking in, and even being aware of those emotions is like the first step of finally understanding and being mindful with our food. It's totally okay to eat if you're sad or mad, right? But it's just like being aware of that and understanding that that's an actual process that you have inside your own body is a huge step in the right direction of being ultimately mindful with our food. Okay. So that's number 3. Number 4 is find the most healthy thing you can indulge on guilt-free, right? So sometimes what happens when we do stress eat is we just go for like the big bang, right? We're looking for the biggest fucking most calorie dense thing. Let's just fucking send it. And we're going to absolutely destroy whatever it is. We're going to get 2 bacon eaters because fuck it, we're stress eating now. We're like, everything's game. Just try to dispense of that as much as you can and find something that's like relatively healthy that you can actually enjoy, right? And the key there is actually enjoy, because ultimately, like, I don't want you guys getting some like bullshit fucking health ice cream that like doesn't even scratch that itch, right? If the healthiest thing that you can find is going to be like a whole fat ice cream, then fucking whole fat ice cream is what it is. But it's like, maybe that's better than like the double chocolate chunk fucking, gallon of ice cream that you would have gotten otherwise. So it's all on a continuum, right? Try to move that notch as far up the continuum as you can towards like the whole food, healthy, high protein kind of thing, so that we can at least minimize the damage that might be done to just stress eating. And if like every time we make like a 1% better, healthier decision when we stress eat, after a couple of months, maybe your indulgent stress thing looks a lot better than it did before. So personally, like one of my go-to things is Greek yogurt with a scoop of protein. You put that shit in the freezer too, and it's just like ice cream. And even now, like, it tastes like pudding to me. So I just fucking love it. You sprinkle some like protein granola or something like that on top of that. Like, yeah, it kind of becomes calorie dense, but ultimately it's like, if that's your fucking stress cheat meal, you're doing pretty good. So those are 4 tools for stress eating. Hopefully one of those are helpful for you. And next we'll get into the always hungry situation. So this one, it can be a little bit difficult because there are a lot of factors to this, and it can be complicated to understanding whether what you're actually experiencing is hunger or possibly just hunger pangs from being stressed and wanting to eat, or being bored and wanting to eat, because the body is fucking weird, and that sometimes it will just, give you hunger pangs because it just wants something, right? It's craving like sugar, it's craving something, and the hunger pang is just there. And when we have a hunger pang, we want to eat. So we have this kind of weird situation of like, we need to discover whether that's a real hunger pang or if that's just saying, your brain is saying like, come on, come on. So first and foremost, I think the biggest thing that we need to talk about is like upping your calories, right? So if you're tracking, if you're doing a lot of workouts, maybe even you're upgrading your training and maybe doing 2 a days or working out more than 5 times a week, probably the first thing you have to do is up your calories. Now, if you're already counting and you know that you have a high caloric intake already, then you can dispense with this one. But I do speak with a lot of people who are typically notorious undereaters when it comes to their CrossFit training. So make sure that you get, this is just rough numbers. Everyone's going to look a little bit different depending on what their lifestyle is and, what they do for workouts and what their day job is and how well they sleep, all that stuff. But ultimately, I usually go with zero 0.8 to 1 gram per pound of protein, 0.8 to 1 gram per pound of carbs, and 0.4 per pound of fats for body weight. So if you're 100 pounds, then I don't think anyone here is 100 pounds, but if you're 100 pounds, you should be getting 100 grams of protein, roughly 80 to 100 grams of protein, same for carbs, or like 40 fats. So if you're 200 pounds, it'd be like 200, 280. That's just some rough numbers of roughly where you should be. So you can kind of plus or minus that 10 to 20% based on your lifestyle. But it's just a good place to start. And it might, if you're not used to dealing with macros, give you a little bit of an idea of where you should start. So taking that consideration, if you have any questions about that, please feel free to reach out. I'll always give you pointers on your macros. Second is up your protein, right? So protein is notorious for not only repairing muscles, helping with, making us stronger and recovery, but it's also really good as a satiation tool. So when we have adequate protein, we're way more likely to feel fuller longer. So if you have low protein levels, you're much more likely to have hunger pangs just randomly. Your appetite might be a little bit more volatile than usual. So when we do have adequate protein quantities, you're much more likely to have a pretty consistent, predictable appetite and satiety signals that don't really change that much. So I would say if you're tracking, try adding 30 to 50 grams of protein to your macro. So basically a serving or two of protein. I'm actually bold that here for you guys. And then if you're not tracking, add 1 to 2 servings of protein to your day, which is 1 to 2 handfuls of protein. So if you're thinking about like chicken breast, for example, it would be like 1 to 2 chicken breasts roughly. If it's steak, it's like a palm-sized steak, kind of. You can see my palm. Where's my camera? So like a palm-sized steak. That's just some like rough numbers as a kind of a guess. So just increase your protein a little bit. Even that could be like a scoop and a half of protein as well. So just some rough numbers to add to your diet so that we can have a little bit more satiation and we don't have the cravings. Number 3, eat more whole foods. Okay, so with the whole foods, you're much more likely to have like complex molecular structures that take longer to digest and things like that. So it's going to spend a lot more time inside your body digesting, which then, because it digests more slowly, you're probably going to basically back up the pipes a little bit more. It's going to take a lot longer, which means that we'll probably feel satiated longer. Also, because just the added nutrients, it's more likely to fill all our stores that we need filled. With the processed foods, they can really tend to, I don't want to get too graphic, but they can kind of go through you sometimes. So try to eat as many whole foods as you can. Maybe even think about increasing your fiber intake, a little bit more like complex carbs to improve that. That's another way to always try to combat the always hungry situation. And lastly, this is kind of the one that I alluded to at the beginning, is that we want to be sure that it's hunger. So it's really hard to determine whether it is hunger, but one surefire way to do it is just sit with it, right? Sometimes hunger pangs can come and go. So I do have a little bit of a confession to make, because I used to be someone that fasted a lot. I don't anymore, but one thing that I did take away from when I did fast is that I was really surprised by how hunger can just go away, right? It comes on, it can be really strong, and then literally minutes after, it can just go away, and you forgot that you were hungry. So I'm not telling you to starve yourself. I'm definitely not telling you to fast. But one thing I want you to do is that if you're hungry, just sit with that hunger for like 3 to 4 minutes. If you still have it, then go eat. You know what I mean? Just be sure that it's hunger, because sometimes with like fluctuating hormones, with fluctuating, various blood sugar levels and things like that, you could have been spiking and then crashing. Like there's all kinds of things that might impact our satiety and our appetite. So just sit with that and just be patient. So if you just wait 3 or 4 minutes and you're still hungry, cool. And if you wait 3 or 4 minutes and you're not, then that was just a weird hunger pain that kind of just came and went. So just something to think about. Don't always just like immediately, if you're hungry, hey, I have to go to the fridge and eat something because I'm starved. Wait, see what happens, and then make a decision. Okay. Ultimately, yeah, we gave you 4 tools for each situation. So 12 tools in all. Hopefully, some of those are helpful and will help you beat some of the cravings that you have, whether it's bored, stressed, or just hunger cravings. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. And if you want a copy of this training, just drop a comment below, and I'll be sure to get it over to you. So hope you all have a good day, and we'll be chatting soon. Cheers. Oh, good luck in the Open too. I know we'll be talking before, but if I don't hear from you,